after stepping down as ambassador? If so, how much? Was that paid by taxpayers? Will details of his contract be published in the name of transparency? Was any NDA agreement signed in any way? And when did Lord Mandelson's salary formally cease? These are not unreasonable questions. We're almost 2 months on, and I have had no response from the Cabinet Secretary, and that gives me enormous concern.
Yeah.
To the first part of the Honourable Lady's question, as the Prime Minister made very clear, when the extent and depth of the relationship between Peter Mandelson and Jeffrey Epstein post his conviction became clear, the Prime Minister moved very quickly indeed to sack Peter Mandelson as ambassador to the United States. The Prime Minister was not aware of that at the point of his appointment, and Peter Mandelson made certain commitments to the Prime Minister that obviously turned out to be untrue. In respect to the Honourable Lady's letter to the Cabinet Secretary, I will feed that back to the Cabinet Secretary and ensure that she gets appropriate answers to her questions.
John Slinger.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Could the Chief Secretary explain what steps this government has taken to make sure that the voices of the victims and the survivors of sexual abuse and violence are heard by those in power?
My honourable friend knows that the government has committed to reducing violence against women and girls and has brought forward recently a strategy for how we'll be working across government to do just that over the years ahead. And specifically in respect of the victims of Jeffrey Epstein, we will continue to do all that we can to support any investigations to ensure justice for those victims and encourage everybody else with any information to do just the same.
Monica Harding.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I asked the Prime Minister in this chamber, on behalf of my constituents in East and Morton, who were asking the same thing, why Peter Mandelson had been appointed at all as our most senior ambassador, given the knowledge of his links with Epstein. By September, it was clear just how close that relationship had got, and yet the PM didn't immediately sack him, but there still wasn't a full investigation of Mandelson's relationship with Epstein. So why is that investigation only happening now? And given that the Prime Minister stated his commitment to restoring trust in public life, how does the Minister equate that with his delay, with his promise to uphold these standards and the delay in investigating it?
I'm not sure that I agree with the Honourable Lady that there's been any undue delay in investigations one way or another. Peter Mandelson made commitments to the Prime Minister at the time of his appointment that his relationship with Jeffrey Epstein was different to that which then became evident when documents were released. As soon as the extent and depth of that relationship became clear, the Prime Minister sacked Peter Mandelson within a matter of days from his post as ambassador to the United States. Now that even more information has become available, the Cabinet Secretary is reviewing what documents is available in the government archive and will of course comply with any investigation that may then take place.
Chris Vins.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thank the Chief Secretary for his statement, in particular his focus on the victims of these terrible crimes is absolutely right. I think, Madam Deputy Speaker, whatever cover rosette you wear, the majority of us who come to this House come here to represent our constituencies, and I hope that I show that I represent my constituency of Harlow as well as I can every single day. So when we hear of an MP, and in this case a government minister, representing the interests of outside bodies, in this case a vile paedophile, it is absolutely disgraceful and very upsetting for us who come here for the right reasons. Can I ask the Chief Secretary what he will do, working with the PM, to ensure that we have a strengthened ministerial code so this can never happen again?
My honourable friend is absolutely right. The government, and specifically the Prime Minister, has already strengthened the ministerial code that we are all subject to in this House today, and made the ethics advisor independent, giving him the authority to investigate ministers freely without requiring permission from the Prime Minister, as was the case under the previous administration. That has already shown to be effective where ministers have had to stand down as a consequence of breaches of the ministerial code. It is right and proper that we have robust rules in this House for ministers and for members, and it is about time that we have similar processes in the House of Lords as well.
Brendan O'Hara.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Try as he might, the Prime Minister cannot escape his responsibility in this, the latest scandal to engulf Peter Mandelson. Ordering a very limited inquiry or investigation now into his activities is pretty meaningless. What we need is an investigation which is fully independent of government or the Labour Party, which has the scope not just to investigate Mandelson, but also those who put him in the House of Lords, those who promoted him to being the UK ambassador to the United States, and those who have done everything they possibly can to protect him over several decades, despite his scandal-ridden career. Does the Minister not agree?
The Prime Minister has acted at every stage with integrity. It is Peter Mandelson who has to be accountable for the actions of Peter Mandelson. And to suggest that the Prime Minister should be responsible for the actions of Peter Mandelson is obviously wrong-headed. As I've said in my statement to the House today, Peter Mandelson, who is no longer a member of the Labour Party, should be accountable for his actions and should account for them.
Dr Caroline Johnson.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I think it's disgraceful the government are choosing not to bring forward legislation to remove Peter Mandelson from the House of Lords. It's entirely within their gift to do so. The public know this. The public will be not only alarmed by the fact that the government are not doing this, but they'll question the motivation for their delay. But if I could ask the Minister a specific question, on what date exactly did Peter Mandelson cease to be paid by the government?
As the Honourable Lady knows from the debate in the House today, it is not that we don't wish to take action in respect of Peter Mandelson, it's that we respect action to be taken that affects all members of the House of Lords, whether it's Peter Mandelson or other peers who need to be removed from the House of Lords as a consequence of their behaviour. We stand ready to act swiftly on that basis and have asked the House of Lords to bring forward proposals to do just that.
Chris Law.
To speak of revelations in the press that Peter Mandelson was leaking confidential government secrets to paedophile Jeffrey Epstein whilst Business Secretary should be more than enough to evidence to warrant expelling him from the House of Lords, and yet we hear today that's not going to happen through legislation. Sadly, Madam Deputy Speaker, this is yet another scandal in the House of Lords, and whilst Labour's promised major Lords reform over 100 years, time and again they've kicked the can down the road. So does the Chief Secretary agree with many in this House that rather than desperately trying to reform what's an embarrassingly broken system, it is time for the House of Lords to be finally abolished?
The Honourable Member knows that the Government has stated and believes that Peter Mandelson should not be a member of the House of Lords and should not use his title, but he is right that the rules need to be updated to allow for that action to be implemented by the House of Lords. We've written to the House of Lords authorities today to say that that work must begin, and the Government stands ready to support them in doing that.
Dr Andrew Mirison.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. To be fair to Peter Mandelson, I think the crustacean in John Prescott's jam jar was in fact a crab and not a scorpion. Madam Deputy Speaker, in our system, it is very unusual for ambassadors and high commissioners to be appointed outside the ranks of the civil service, and for pretty good reason. When that does happen, and particularly when the appointee is a politician with baggage, as here, the appointer has to own it, because he has made that decision, in this case against advice. What does the Minister think this fiasco says about the judgment of our Prime Minister?
The Prime Minister's judgment was made clear when, as soon as information became available that he had been misled by Peter Mandelson, he sacked him.
Vicky Slade.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The actions of Peter Mandelson are a disgrace, and I support proposals to remove him without delay. But he is not the only British person implicated in the appalling Epstein files. So what is the government doing to ensure that all those linked to Mandelson, Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor and any political, public or civic figure are fully investigated here, not just cooperating with US authorities, but taking action here for all the crimes committed on our soil?
The Honourable Lady knows that it's not the government that instigates criminal investigations. It's for the Criminal Prosecution Service and the police to take those decisions independently of ministers. But whether in respect of UK investigations or investigations in the United States, the government's made it very clear that all individuals should comply with those investigations and make any information available to ensure that the victims of Jeffrey Epstein's acts are able to seek justice.
Lincoln Jopp.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. When the Prime Minister sacked Lord Mandelson as the American ambassador, ministers came to this House and that dispatch box, and I pointed out to them that for the whole time that he was our ambassador, he had been subject to politically fatal compromat, which therefore left him open to leverage, as it finally played out. And I said that if we found out that he was spying for Russia or China, we'd be turning his time in office inside out, every single aspect of it, in order to find out the truth. And the government said, well, he's been sacked. So does the Minister regret the fact that following his sacking, they didn't do the sort of due diligence and inquiries which might have unearthed the documents from the Department of Justice?
To be clear, the documents produced by the United States Department of Justice were not available to the government until they were released a number of days ago. And as soon as they have become available, we've instigated processes within our own authorities to make sure that we have a clear view of what information was available to government at the time and to comply with any investigations that may take place.
Rachel Gilmore.
Madam Deputy Speaker, as so many of my colleagues have rightly said, our thoughts today should be first and foremost with the victims.
Thank you.
And I would hope that no political party in this chamber would use it as an excuse to cover the backs of some of their less fragrant members of the House of Lords. The fact that Lord Mandelson, as ever, was only interested in the ruthless pursuit of financial gain will come as no surprise, as a surprise to no one. Number 10 now saying that Mandelson should indeed lose his peerage. I have to say, I wholeheartedly concur. However, isn't it staggering that members of this House seemed more aware of Mr Mandelson's skeletons in the wardrobe than the Prime Minister who appointed him?
Yeah.
As far as I'm aware, Madam Deputy Speaker, no member of this House had access to the information recently published by the United States Department for Justice or the documents that were released at the time the Prime Minister sacked the ambassador to the United States. The Prime Minister has been very clear to this House previously that had he had access to that information, he would not have appointed him in the first place.
Claire Young.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Minister indicated that Mandelson assured the Prime Minister that his relationship with Epstein was of a different nature. Can he explain what sort of relationship with a convicted paedophile would be acceptable in this role? And will the Prime Minister come back to the House to make a specific statement on the advice he received regarding Mandelson's conduct?
The information that became available in September, which led to the sacking of Peter Mandelson as ambassador to the United States, made it clear for the first time to all of us and to the Prime Minister that Peter Mandelson not only remained a friend with Jeffrey Epstein following his conviction, but had actively mentored and encouraged him on how to challenge that conviction and how to push back against it. That was one example. There is now a list of examples of how the depth and extent of the relationship following the conviction of Jeffrey Epstein between Jeffrey Epstein and Peter Mandelson was unacceptable. If the Prime Minister had known that at the time Peter Mandelson was being considered to be ambassador to the United States, he would not have appointed him. And as soon as the Prime Minister became aware of that information, he sacked him.
Richard Ford.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Epstein files suggest that Lord Mandelson was prepared to lobby in the United States for a policy position in contradiction to the position of Her Majesty's government, which he was then serving in 2009 as Business Secretary. How will this revelation encourage the government to find out where else Lord Mandelson has lobbied against his government while serving last year as British Ambassador to the United States? And can the Chief Secretary find out where in US policy towards the UK this lobbying against British government policy is revealed?
As I've informed the House today, Madam Deputy Speaker, the Cabinet Secretary is currently reviewing all documentation that relates to Peter Mandelson's time as a minister in the last Labour government to see what information is available today, and will comply with any investigations that take place as a consequence of that in the future. He is right that any minister acting against the collective decisions of Cabinet and against the government is a breach of the rules and is unacceptable behaviour, and if any minister were to do that today, they would be quickly dismissed.
Jim Shannon.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I thank the Chief Secretary for his statement today? It is indeed very disturbing to read of the role of Peter Mandelson when holding high office in government. Just to remind the Chief Secretary, he was also the EU Trade Commission for 5 years. I believe that needs investigating as well, because how far does this go? I can also ask, it's my understanding that the latest releases may have made public victims' names that weren't previously released. So can the Chief Secretary please assure this House that any British victims who have been made public will have support and help to make their way through what could be a re-traumatising experience with this time press invasion and interference. Thank you.
I was not aware of that issue, so I thank the honourable gentleman for bringing it to my attention. And of course, if there are any British victims affected by the crimes of Jeffrey Epstein, whether in relation to the latest publication of documents or otherwise, government services stand ready to be of support to those victims and to ensure that they can seek justice.
And that concludes the statement. Point of order, Sir David Davies.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. On Wednesday, 21st of January, before my contribution to the debate on the Northern Ireland remedial order, I omitted to refer to my entry in the Register of Members' Interests. Now, that was an oversight, as it includes a declaration of a major contribution from Sir Michael Gooley in support of the campaign to protect military veterans from lawfare, for which I am the custodian. That was a mistake on my part, for which I obviously apologise to the House.
I thank the Right Honourable Member for giving notice of his point of order. On the first point, he has now drawn the House's attention to his relevant declaration in the Register. Point of order, Sean Woodcock.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Last month, the Leader of the Opposition and the Shadow Chancellor paid a visit to my constituency without giving notice to myself as the local member. I'd be very grateful if the Deputy Speaker could provide me with advice to prevent such discourtesy and disrespect taking place in the future.
I thank the honourable gentleman for giving notice of that point of order, as the leaflet on courtesies makes clear. Members should inform colleagues in advance if they intend to visit another member's constituency. It is deeply discourteous to fail to do so. Point of order, Dr Caroline Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I've listened to the last debate very carefully, and I wondered if you could help me with a procedural question. Would it be orderly for the government, if it wished, to bring forward legislation as soon as it wished to do so, to remove Peter Mandelson of his peerage?
I thank the honourable member for her point of order. However, introduction of legislation is a matter for the government. We now move to the programme motion. Programme motion to be moved formally.
I beg to move.
The question is as on the order paper. As many as are of that opinion say aye.
Aye.
Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. The clerk will now proceed to read the orders of the day.
Biodiversity Beyond National Jurisdiction Bill, consideration of Lord's amendments.
No.
I can inform the House that nothing in the Lord's amendments engages Commons financial privilege. We will begin with the government motion to agree the Lord's Amendment 1, with which it will be convenient to consider all other Lord's amendments as on the selection paper. I call the Minister to move the motion. Minister.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I am delighted that the Biodiversity Beyond National Jurisdiction Bill has returned to this House for consideration of Lord's amendments. I thank members of both Houses for their careful scrutiny and for the constructive and collaborative approach that has taken place throughout the bill's passage. I also place on record my thanks to Baroness Chapman of Darlington for leading the bill expertly through the other place. In today's debate, we will seek to address the amendments that were made by the government there, and I also thank all of those in the other place who have been involved in debates on this bill. Before I speak to the amendments, I want to remind the House that the passage of this bill is a vital part of delivering the UK's international obligations under the BBNJ agreement. It will strengthen the global framework for protecting biodiversity in areas of the ocean beyond national jurisdiction, improve how we manage environmental impacts in these areas, and help ensure that the benefits arising from marine genetic resources are shared fairly. I am pleased to inform the House that as of the 17th of January, the BBNJ agreement has now entered into force. Following royal assent of this bill and subsequent secondary legislation, which will be passed in the coming months, The UK will ratify the agreement and intends to play a leading role at the first Conference of the Parties, which will take place at some point before the 16th of January 2027. Turning to the amendments from the other place. Today, the House is asked to consider a package of 12 amendments, all of which were put forward by the government. These amendments relate to devolution and are designed to support effective implementation of the BBNJ agreement across the whole of the United Kingdom, while respecting the devolution settlements and ensuring that devolved ministers are appropriately engaged where devolved competence is affected. I'm very happy to give way.
Speaker, can I thank the Minister for what the Minister is putting forward. I know that Part 2 of the bill contains a specific exception for fishing and that the new regulations do not apply to the use of a UK craft for fishing if it is done under a valid licence under the Fisheries Act 2020. I've been contacted by some of the organisations back home in Northern Ireland, and so does the Minister not agree that it's essential that the devolved administrations enshrine this in acknowledging that the fishing industry is reliant on the ability to continue to fish in all current areas? In other words, Madam Deputy Speaker, it's important that the administrations, the Northern Ireland Assembly in particular, does what this bill says, because if it doesn't do that, then the Northern Ireland fishing organisation will find themselves at a disadvantage. Thank you.
I thank the honourable member for his question. It is indeed important that all our devolved administrations, as well as the UK government, are abiding by the agreement, and I thank him for his interest and his engagement in this important bill. I am really grateful as well to those, to all of those who we have been engaging with through the passage of this bill. And working closely with ministers and officials in the devolved governments, we agreed at the introduction of the bill that legislative consent motion that the legislative consent motion process is engaged for Scotland and Northern Ireland to varying extents by Part 2, 3 and 4 of the bill. The government has been in sustained discussions with both of these devolved governments to seek consent for the bill, and I can confirm to the House that motions on consent have been passed by the Scottish Parliament and the Northern Ireland Assembly. Lord's Amendments 1 and 4 provide Scottish ministers and Northern Ireland Department of Agriculture, Environment and Rural Affairs with concurrent powers to make regulations within devolved competence corresponding to the powers to make provision granted to the Secretary of State under Clause 9 and Clause 11 of the bill. Amendments 2 and 5 provide the procedure for those powers.
As one understands it, the BBNJ is dealing with matters primarily in international waters, and of course devolved institutions have no say in those matters. So as to broaden an understanding of the bill, what type of regulations is it anticipated that DERA, the local stormont department, would be making in consequence of this bill?
I thank the honourable member, and what I will say is that following the ratification of the agreement, that we will be participating in the future discussions in relation to the implementation of the agreement, and there will continue to be further conversations. I think the important point I do want to make, and I think this is relevant for the work we've been doing with Scotland, with Wales and with Northern Ireland, is that it does reflect how our UK government officials and devolved officials are already working together effectively in practice, and including in relation to consultation and effective delivery. And I know that these will be conversations that do continue. If I can continue with my remarks, Madam Deputy Speaker, in relation to Amendments 3 and 6, These place a duty on the Secretary of State to consult Scottish ministers and the Department of Agriculture, Environment and Rural Affairs in Northern Ireland before exercising powers in clauses 9 and 11, where regulations engaged devolve matters. This duty does not apply where the Secretary of State considers that regulations need to be made urgently for the purposes of implementing emergency measures adopted under Article 24(1) of the BBNJ agreement. This approach ensures that devolved governments are engaged in advance of regulations being made, enables them to make their own provision on devolved aspects where they wish to do so, and reflects their responsibilities while supporting timely and effective implementation of the agreement. Lord's Amendment 7, I will give way.
Shannon.
Speaker, the reason why I'm asking, because I've been asked these questions by the fishing organisations back home, I want to put them on the record, and I wish to just very quickly. The bill enables the creation of internationally agreed MPAs in the high seas. If a Northern Ireland vessel operates in these international waters, it may face new restrictions on where it can fish to protect vulnerable habitats and species like sharks and whales. Does the Minister not agree that we need to ensure that MPAs are not created without the fishing industry, that's the sector itself, the fishing organisations, the fish producers, and that their opinions carry weight and not simply just a checkbox exercise? I just want to put it on record, please, if you don't mind. Thank you.
I thank the honourable member, and indeed he does continue to put on the record his concerns, and he will know that as we move forward following ratification, there will be detailed conversations we will continue to have, and it is important that that the rules and regulations as we move forward will also be clear for all to be operating by. Madam Deputy Speaker, I was just referencing our approach and how we've been moving forward on the bill, and to ensure that devolved governments are engaged in advance of regulations being made, and that does enable them to be able to make their own provision on devolved aspects where they may wish to do so. And we continue to work closely together to support timely and effective implementation of the agreement. Lord's Amendment 7 inserts a new clause after Clause 17 that makes changes to the Marine Works Environmental Impact Assessment Scotland Regulations 2017 to ensure that the UK meets its obligations under the BBNJ agreement in relation to the Scottish marine licensable activities in areas beyond national jurisdiction. The UK Government will be amending its own environmental impact assessment regulations, and Scottish Government officials have worked closely with UK counterparts to draft corresponding provisions. Accordingly, Amendments 8 and 9 also limit the power in Clause 18 to only implementing Article 38 standards or guidelines, as a wider power is no longer required in light of other changes that will be made directly through the bill. Lord's Amendments 10 and 11 ensure that under Clause 22, which sets out procedures for the making of regulations under the Act, does not apply to regulations made under clauses introduced by Lord's Amendments 1 and 4. Instead, the procedures set out in Government Amendments 2 and 5 respectively apply. Finally, Lord's Amendment 12 amends Clause 25 so that the clause introduced by Amendment 7 comes into force on such a day as the Secretary of State appoints by regulations rather than upon royal assent. This change ensures a consistent approach across the bill with regards to the environmental impact assessment regulations that are being amended. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, the Government's objective is to implement the BBNJ agreement effectively across the whole of the United Kingdom, and to do so in a way that respects the devolution settlement and supports continued constructive collaboration with devolved governments. I therefore commend these 12 Lord's amendments to the House, and I urge members to support them. I beg to move.
The question is that this House agrees with the Lords in their Amendment 1. I call the Shadow Minister.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. We on this side of the House recognise the importance of the Biodiversity Beyond National Jurisdiction Bill and the shared international ambition to protect the world's oceans and marine ecosystems. The opposition supports the principle of effective global cooperation in this area, and we want this legislation to succeed. However, it is precisely because of the bill's significance, its reach across devolved administrations and its potential financial and regulatory consequences that it demands the highest standards of scrutiny and clarity. It is in that constructive spirit that I wish to raise a number of questions for the Minister today. I hope in the same constructive spirit she seeks to answer them fully. We know that the Government tabled quite a number of amendments to the bill at report stage in the House of Lords. Those amendments are before us today. I must say it is rather disappointing that the Government needed to do this at such a late stage in the bill's passage, and as my noble friend Lord Callanan said in the other place, tabling amendments at such a late stage was not conducive to the best Lord's scrutiny. Does the Minister accept that the work with the devolved administrations, which led to the tabling of these amendments, should have taken place earlier? And are lessons going to be learned for future legislation? On the new clauses, on the clauses consultation with Scotland and Northern Ireland, to be inserted after clauses 9 and 12, can the Minister confirm that this definitely does not stray into legislative consent territory? Can the Minister also set out what would happen if Scottish or Northern Irish ministers do not approve of measures during the consultation process? Regarding the new clause to be inserted after clause 12 relating to the new regulation making power, what would happen if, say, the Scottish Government decided to take a divergent path or set up a system that puts itself at odds with the UK Government position? Is there a risk to the operability of the system here? Madam Deputy Speaker, the Government's own impact assessment found that this bill will generate compliance costs for those involved in the collection and utilisation of marine genetic resources and related digital sequence information. What steps are the Government taking to ensure that these costs aren't prohibitive to the very research we are hoping to promote through the bill? While there are still many unanswered questions about enforcement, it is hard to see how the compliance, licensing and enforcement will be cheap. What level of resource is going to be put in to enforcing the regime? A Ways and Means resolution is required for this bill precisely because it will lead to costs to the public purse. So what assessment has the Government made of the value for money in this respect, and what is the cost-benefit ratio? The final stage impact assessment also makes reference to potential future costs if emergency legislation is needed to respond to any further decisions by the Convention of Biological Diversity. Can the Minister clarify the parameters here? What it is they are anticipating, how much money do they assess might be involved, and are they planning to ensure the risk of unintended consequences is mitigated? Finally, it would be impossible not to mention the tension between the Government's ambitions with this bill and its surrender of the Chagos Islands, which may well see the dismantling of an exemplar marine protected area. Can she tell us exactly what undertaking Mauritius has given to the MPA? Any red lines the Government has clearly set out, and precisely what continuing role Britain will play in MPA management per terms of the treaty. For example, has the Government had any discussions about preventing damaging Chinese trawler boats from accessing the MPA? Madam Deputy Speaker, we all share the objective of protecting our oceans and safeguarding biodiversity beyond national jurisdiction. Indeed, that is why it was a Conservative government that first signed up to the Biodiversity Beyond National Jurisdiction Agreement. But good intentions on their own are not enough. This House is entitled to clear answers on scrutiny, devolution, operability, cost, enforcement and value for money, as well as honesty about how this bill sits alongside the government's wider actions on marine protection in the British overseas territories. Until ministers can provide that clarity and reassurance, there remains a real risk that a bill designed to lead internationally will instead create uncertainty at home. I urge the Minister to fully respond to the questions raised today so that the House can be confident that this legislation is workable, proportionate and worthy of the ambitions the Government has for it.
Chair of the Select Committee, Toby Perkins.
Thank you very much indeed, Madam Deputy Speaker. I warmly welcome this bill, the introduction of which had the happy coincidence of fulfilling one of the Government's commitments and satisfying one of the Environmental Audit Committee recommendations at the same time. This landmark legislation will lay the groundwork for protecting the marine environment and the wildlife that inhabit it, which lie beyond the control of individual nations. As the Government's National Security Assessment on Global Biodiversity Loss, published last week, set out in stark terms natural ecosystems such as the ocean and the Amazon rainforest are at risk of collapsing. The resulting crop failures, intensified natural disasters and conflict and political instability are highly likely, the report said, to threaten UK national security and prosperity. It is vital that the UK take leadership on the international stage to tackle global biodiversity loss and climate change. I welcome this Government's commitment to multilateral cooperation on ocean governance, and I look forward to this bill receiving royal assent, enabling the UK to ratify the BBNJ agreement. It's absolutely true to say that the initial indication of the Government supporting this agreement was made by the previous Government, and I think it was disappointing that over the 18 months or so after that commitment was made, that we never actually got the legislation back here. And so I welcome the fact that this Government has taken forward this important measure. The UK also makes an important contribution to global efforts to halt environmental decline through its international funding for climate finance, 1/3 of which is earmarked for nature-based solutions to climate change. However, to date, there has been limited indication of the Government's next steps regarding the next 5-year ICF budget due to commence in April. And the Government has also failed so far to invest in the Tropical Forests Forever facility and leverage further private finance into that innovative fund, protecting forests in perpetuity. So whilst the Minister has rightly championed our contribution to this impressive act of international cooperation, does she agree that we have more to do to ensure that we retain the UK's hard-earned reputation as a global leader in the field of international climate action? Can the Minister confirm that the UK will continue to contribute to protecting and restoring global ecosystems by maintaining its international funding for climate, including for nature projects in the next round of funding? So, in summary, Madam Deputy Speaker, I welcome this important legislation that this Government has acted on where previous governments merely talked about it, and look forward to them to continuing in this positive direction on the other areas I referred to.
I call Liberal Democrat spokesperson Ros Savage.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Liberal Democrats strongly welcome this bill, and it's wonderful to hear the support for it from across this House. The Global Oceans Treaty is one of the most significant environmental agreements of our time. It is currently the world's only viable pathway to meeting the global 30 by 30 target to protect at least 30% of the world's oceans by 2030. And the scale of that challenge is monumental. Right now, less than 1% of the high seas is fully protected. That's less than 1 penny in the pound of the global ocean. And this is the gap that this treaty begins to close. The ocean underpins everything. It feeds billions of people, absorbs around 1/4 of global carbon emissions, regulates our weather and supports livelihoods across the world. Yet it's under extraordinary and growing pressure from overfishing, plastic pollution and climate change. I've seen those pressures firsthand. Rowing solo across 3 oceans, I saw both the beauty of the high seas and the damage that we're doing to them. Out there, beyond national borders, it can also feel beyond human laws. But this treaty is about bringing rules, responsibility and stewardship to those waters, and also discharges one of the commitments made by this government to me during the discussions around my private member's bill, the Climate and Nature Bill, and for that I thank them.